Well, good Sunday morning, everyone. Things come and go, like the bond election, but some things don't, like the needs. And to move forward, it's important to be on the same page. To do that, an opportunity to understand what happened, some attempting to do that, starting in this room just a couple of weeks ago.
First of all, how do we get to the bond? You know, trying to fund a rec center or something by Dr. King. And that's how it started rolling. And the intentions of the bond committee were good. You know, we want to fund what we need more than what we want, right?
Well, that claim made in the wake of this month's bond election, but not everyone agrees. Still, an opportunity to talk rec centers will finally have its time and place at the next City Council meeting. An agenda item sponsored by Councilmember Dr. King for a study to look at the needs for rec centers in the city. And here with us this morning to talk about all things District 6 is Councilmember Dr. Tyler King. Also joining us is KGNS General Manager Luis Villarreal. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you all so much.
Good morning.
For joining us, Dr. King. We appreciate having you with us. You know, I want to start off with that comment that was made by Mr. Baldasso, kind of insinuating that maybe the whole bond election was of your doing.
Yes.
I know that you had a lot of apprehensions about the bond because you really wanted a rec center in District 6.
Well, that would give me quite a bit of power if I was able to create this bond all by myself. But in all seriousness, back in June of last year, 2024, I did go to the mayor and to former council member, Alberto Torres, and I said, guys, you know, cities across the state are funding a lot of quality of life projects such as rec centers and other things that we desperately need to keep people here and bring people here to stay here. And they agreed to put an item on the agenda to get the process started because I've lived in other cities in Texas and throughout the country, and you know, when I lived in McAllen and saw how they did their convention center, that was through a bond election. You know, when you see all these, when you look at Round Rock, Texas, that just did a $280 million bond in 2023, to which 240 million of that was towards parks and recreation. You know, and you know, so when you're seeing all these other cities across Texas, and by the way, Texas. The state of Texas forces cities to do this. Basically, because of the cap they put, it used to be 8%, now it's 3.5% since 2019. The cap on cities for financing basically forces cities to do this. Basically, it says, hey, if you're going to raise any property values, or not values, because we don't do that, that's WebCat, property taxes in any way, shape, or form to then bond out money. Because how do you bond out money? Just like when you go to buy a house, you submit your income, and then that's what the bank decides how much you can borrow to how much housing you afford. Same thing with cities. Basically, if you want to borrow money to build things, brick and mortar things, you show the crediting agencies how much tax revenue you're bringing in, and they tell you how much you can borrow to build X, Y, and Z thing. So in Texas, if you want to do those things, you have to go to the voters and ask. If you want to do more than what your current tax revenue allows you to do, that's what you have to do. So I did start the process of talking about the bond election with the hopes of, yes, a rec center for District 6. I'm not going to apologize because I won a rec center for District 6 and I was trying to find ways to do it. This was not the first idea I had about funding the rec center. We were going through business improvement, where you have these improvement districts, where tax incentive reinvestment zones, like we have a few of them. We can potentially add more that could fund a rec center. All of those things were getting stalled. And I'm looking around Texas, seeing as all the other cities funding it in this other way, election. And I did some research, and I found out that Laredo hasn't done a bond referendum election since 1993. What did they do when they did that in 1993? They funded the Geta Public Library, the West Laredo Overpass, rec centers, and then a police and fire station. So, you know, it's interesting that Laredo hasn't done one in so long. And then you look at Mayor Aldo Tatangelo, one of the most well-appreciated and respected mayors in Laredo's history. 1978 to 1990, he was mayor. Laredo's only done 3 bond elections in its entire history. 2 of those 3 were under him, 1986 and 1989. $15 million towards streets. That time, there'd be about $50 million today. So, you know, he always gets credit. Mayor Tatangelo gets credit for paving the streets. Well, part of how he did it was through a bond election. So And by the way, all of this, I'm not defending the final package of the bond, because that's, I think, where the next part of your questions are going to be. Because yes, the council voted to approve those, but if I could have chosen the package, in my own way, it would have been a lot different.
I think that, Dr. King, let me interrupt you. I think that, and I'm not trying to defend or the comment that Mr. Baldasso made, but I think the misunderstanding is that what I believe he was trying to say is, from a good thing or from a good project or a good want and need that you brought, it snowballed into a bunch of things that perhaps didn't need to be added and stuff like that. I don't know that he meant to say that it was because you wanted a rec center, everything happened. I think that was just the catalyst that started the talk.
Sure, and you know what? Actually, I think I've heard from my constituents since that comment came out there, and they're all very appreciative that I was trying
That's right.
to get a rec center.
Yeah.
You know, most people, besides maybe him and a few others who don't have children and don't think about these types of things for quality of life things, like the majority of my constituents want me to be fighting for a rec center. I feel very confident in that. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the package ended up being, very different and probably larger than it should have been and too soon. And at the February 11th meeting, we had 3 days before the deadline to call the election. At the February 11th meeting, I made a motion to push it back to November to make a better package so that we could have more public engagement because I didn't think we were ready. What happened? Ultimately the council disagreed with me and we moved forward with going with May. And ultimately it was too rushed. There was not enough private sector investment on the outside. Other cities have these huge political action committees funded by the private sector that are pushing a Vote Yes campaign. We had a city of Laredo essential initiative, and there's restrictions, but I was not satisfied with the fact that the city was doing so much of the legwork.
Agreed.
It shouldn't be the city's job to push this.
If you have not convinced the constituency or the business community that these things are needed, something is wrong.
You can't move forward with this until you have support
Some
from
sort of
the
consensus.
outside. Yeah, you can't just rush something
Correct.
through. And I'm trying my best not to do this Monday morning quarterbacking, but at the end of the day, the facts are the facts. February 11th, I tried to push it back to November. It didn't ultimately happen. Nonetheless, we have to move forward, okay? We all have to come together and say, let's reflect. What I said after the bond election, and I put out a lot of information during the election because Councilmember Melissa Cigarroa and I, we chose to keep our councilmember hats on and just give out neutral, objective information. One of our colleagues and friends, Councilmember Elisa Cigarroa, she took off her councilmember hat, and she, basically, I don't want to say that she electioneered against it per se, but I mean, she essentially took off her councilmember hat because legally we were advised that we were not allowed to electioneer. So, some of us decided, okay, we're going to keep our councilmember hat on and we're just going to put out objective information. I did a Facebook Live. I put out a manifesto, an 8-page PDF explaining.
I tried to read it.
Sorry about that. But ultimately, and then most of the other council members just, chose to let the process play out, and I respect that that was what they wanted to do. I just felt a sense of obligation to put out factual information, and then that, of course, led to some people thinking that I was pushing for the bond. But people that actually read the full 8 pages of that, about half the people that read it thought I was for the bond, and half people thought I was against the bond. So I
Which
think,
is the reality was that you were just putting out factual information.
Which makes me feel like I did a good job with that with that PDF. But most people aren't going to read that 8-page PDF. So that's why I got to work on getting information out a little more concisely. But yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, I'm sorry, Mindy. At the end of the day, I think that unfortunately the average citizen is not going to read an 8-page manifesto or explanation.
The attention economy.
The average citizen does not understand, not because of ignorance, but because it's, for them, taxes are taxes. Doesn't matter if it's county, city, federal, income tax, property tax. It's just the cost of living and how hard it is. And so I think that it's not about explaining the intricacy of tax law and property law and what the state does and what the state doesn't allow and all those things. I think it's a basic understanding, okay, listen, we're asking you to pay more at the end of the day. This is why. And I don't think there was enough support at
On
the
the
raw
why.
level, on the why,
Exactly.
then you know, and everything was being focused on how small it is and how little it is. Well, no, you can't
Yeah,
do that
yeah,
because it's
exactly.
still coming out of my pocket.
Exactly, no matter how small or big
Right,
it is. It's
correct.
still more money we
It's still
have to
more
pay.
money.
Exactly.
There's clearly
Yeah.
a lack of.
And what are we getting in return for
Correct.
that?
It was too rushed,
Yeah.
and people didn't. And when you don't do something since 1993, you can't rush it.
Yeah.
You gotta take years to build it up. I know UISD, they had their failed bond election in 2007. They waited until 2013, 6 years, until they did their
another one.
redone, and they did it. They passed it because the parents were tired of their kids being in portables.
You know, Dr. Tyler, I wanted to ask, you all have since met at a city council meeting since the bond failed. What were the talks behind closed doors? I mean, where do you all go from here? What's the next step?
You know, that's a great question. I mean, I think all these needs aren't going away. Everything in the bond were needs. I mean, there was no wishful, fairy tales in the bond. But we just didn't, the city didn't have enough time to explain to people. So the next question is, okay, this upcoming budget cycle, we're going to have, last year we had $32 to $40 million that we could use for capital improvement plan. This is outside of the general fund, right? So general fund, pays for police, fire, all the departments that don't bring in revenue. We have enterprise funds like utilities and water that bring in their own revenues, but police, fire, public works, parks, they are services, right? They are not bringing in revenue for the
Sure.
city. They are services. So that's why the general fund, which was about $278 million last year, that's where those funds go to. And this bond was based on that ad valorem property taxes that goes for a general fund, not to mention the bridge transfer. But nonetheless, so at this point, the question is Laredo ever going to consider, doing one of these again? That's a big question. I think it's going to be a while. I think we need to reflect and take a longer process before we do something like this again.
Yeah.
But ultimately, now it's a matter of looking at the budget for this upcoming fiscal year. So we'll start having budget talks at the end of this month, June, July, August, to prepare for the fiscal year.
I think it's a great opportunity, Dr. King, for the city to show, hey, we're going to be responsible about this, publicly display a savings of some sort to pay for something. Show us that there is some responsibility for doing that, and I think that would
Right.
go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely.
It'll bring a lot of attention to it, and I think we should make some cuts. And hopefully, all this attention that this bond brought, hopefully people stay focused and keep that attention going. So,
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. King, for that discussion. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, City Council decides to step away from forming a secondary water source committee. That discussion when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of Beyond the Headlines. Will City Council reopen discussions on a secondary water source at this month's meeting? An agenda item proposed the creation of a city committee to look at the issue, but ultimately, Laredo City Council decided against establishing a committee to focus on a secondary water source, opting instead to address the matter within the Utilities Department. Utilities consultant Walter Buzz Pishker and Interim Utilities Director Eliud de los Santos walked Council through a presentation and reassured them about the water projects and the work being done within the department. However, Laredo Mayor Dr. Victor Trevino, who was not in attendance, submitted a written statement coming out against the idea, saying the committee idea was not necessary or proper. The mayor continued, saying that the proposal also seemed to conflict with a previous resolution passed last November. Well, joining us for this part of the morning conversation is District 3 Councilwoman Melissa Cigarroa, who put the item on the agenda and believes the search for a secondary water source was falling through the cracks. She's joined by her colleague, Dr. Tyler King, and of course, my colleague and boss, KGNS General Manager, Luis Villarreal. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
Appreciate you.
Good morning.
Coming in with this part of the conversation. So you had an agenda item
Yes.
to establish this advisory committee, or?
So I think my goal, it was probably an unfortunate use of the word committee. The intent was to make sure that the Utilities Department take hold of the issue. We've seen it fall through the cracks before. And we know with budget time coming up, how do you get something to be seriously considered? Well, you give it money, you put it in the budget, and that was really the intent of the item. I think the mayor took the item at face value, but the intent was to have a discussion about how we make sure we focus on establishing a secondary water source. We have 3 memorandums of understanding right now, and all of them are for future water development. We still don't have an actual secondary source of water. It's going to require years of preparation, discussion with regional partners, and then developing the actual infrastructure, which not only is getting the water out of the ground, it's piping it to Laredo.
How dire is the situation?
Well, the Region M Planning Group, which is a group that looks at water issues, there are different regions in the entire state, has suggested that by 2040, Laredo's demands will exceed its ability on its water rights to withdraw water from the Rio Grande. So it is dire in that sense, but it's not like our entire water supply is going to evaporate.
Like the river is not going to dry up.
Well,
It's just not going to. There's not going to be enough.
There's not going to be enough, and what we're worried about is because of our continued drought, and we've seen the flows that feed the Rio Grande, which is the Pecos River and the Devil's River, they've gone down by 1/3, and that's just a natural decrease in their flows due to climate change. So that 2040, we hope that we have until 2040 to address those demands.
Wow. Why is it that it's taken so long? I think we've been talking about a secondary water source.
Longer than the water park.
That is true. It's just been decades. So why is it taking so long? What's the problem there?
I don't know if, I think I have a theory, because basically there have been, and I'm relatively new to Laredo, lived here 5 years, but what I've seen is I think there have been chances to pull the trigger on secondary water sources in the past. Like, we know where some of them are, but knowing that the cost of the secondary water source for the residents is going to be double, triple, quadruple what they're currently paying, and then let's say you pull the trigger, then you have to commit to buying that water from wherever you get that secondary water from for and a certain amount of it. And then so that means you're going to be expecting your ratepayers, the people, to be paying for that water. So it's almost like and I'm not saying we should wait until the last second, but there has been I think my theory.
Wouldn't it be more expensive then?
Yeah, because then they're going to know how desperate you are, right?
Correct.
I think I'm just thinking that's the theory of why the city's never done it in the past, because you know that it's going to cause some economic pain for your ratepayers because you're going to have to commit. You can't just say, oh, I'll commit, but only like in 15, 20 years whenever we really need it. They're going to expect you to commit at a certain time, and then that's going to cause the ratepayers to pay.
And we're now at a point where this is an issue across South Texas. So now we can have regional partners, and we're hoping the state of Texas, because they're recognizing that there are cities all over the state that are in dire water circumstances. So if the state can kick in money and we develop regional sources, then we share costs with these other regional partners. And I think, as Councilmember King was saying, it is difficult to try to do this on your own. It is very cost prohibitive. But if we can have a regional source of water, and then you still have to pay for the infrastructure, but if the state will assist us with that, then we're kind of spreading those costs, and it doesn't just fall on our ratepayers.
Luckily, Governor Abbott he did put it on his emergency items for this session, and he wants to put, hopefully $3, $4, $5 billion, and then in his statement he put out was $1 billion per year over the next 10 years. I mean, that's not enough. Currently, the Texas Water Plan by the Texas Water Development Board says we need $90 billion of funding for our water projects across the state. But this is a step in the right direction to see the state finally taking this a lot more seriously. And Councilmember Seguro and I have met with state officials 3 or 4 times over the last 2 years. The chairwoman of the Texas Water Development Board, who's now the chairwoman of TCEQ, we've continued that relationship with her on our trips to Austin, and so and we're actually applying for millions of dollars of grants right now, and low interest loans through the Texas Water Development Board through the leadership of Mr. Buzz Prishker, our interim utilities director, who's been fantastic for our utilities department over these last 6 months, and got a new utilities director coming in June for him to hand the baton off. And yeah, so I mean, one of the things the city that frustrates me is that even though things aren't good, it took us decades to get into this problem. It's going to take us time to get out of it. One of my frustrations with our city government is that we actually have started to do some things towards progress with water, but we don't do a good job of telling the story. We don't do a good job of showing the people what's actually happening. We just had a good presentation by Mr. Buzz Prishker at the most recent council meeting on May 5th, and he went through all of the various projects. And I don't want to. It's over $100 million of projects ongoing right now for our water and sewer system, but the public isn't aware of it.
Right. Let's talking about Mr. Pishkar. So he's leaving. He was the consultant. We have a new one coming in, like you mentioned. So, Melissa, going back to your item about a committee, it did fail. But it didn't fail.
Right. The discussion happened, and I think the focus is on how do we make sure that we have money in the budget so that we can continue to pursue these regional partnerships so that we can actually develop the water, because we, as everyone has said, we've been talking about it for a long time and waiting for something to develop. I think the Legacy Water Supply Corporation, that is that Northern Webb County project.
They're the ones that the county also signed a deal with to provide water, secondary water source for the colonias. And that's a viable option for us as well?
Well, that is what they're presenting to us. Now, they have drilled 4 wells. Their entire plan envisions 42 wells. And it's been a very expensive process, but they are the closest to getting water out of the ground, and then they'll develop a treatment plant because it still needs to be treated, and the city of Laredo is deciding whether it comes to our treatment plant to be treated or whether we buy it already treated. That's the farthest project that's along. But we also have an MOU with Eagle Pass to develop some regional sources there, and then the Nueces River Authority. So those are ongoing conversations, and our utilities department.
I was just going to ask that too.
So that was
That's what you were looking for.
That was the point of her item.
Okay, all right.
To see who was going to spearhead.
So we don't need a committee. We just need to put it in the hands of somebody and say, hey, this is your job.
Is that
Go
what
get
they
this
decided
done.
to do?
So the committee was like interior, right? That's the item said. It's to be inside the utilities department, and really it's just so that we do not lose the focus.
Yeah.
Now, they did say we have a dedicated source of funds, so we have money to make sure that people within the utilities department can go and meet with these other actors that we have to get these plans rolling. It's happening, and we did identify the source of funds.
Okay.
That was the intent of the item.
It was such an innocent item.
Right, because we saw the social media, blow
just,
up about travel and I don't know what.
And so
and,
we as council members, one of our biggest powers is to put items on the agenda, to get the focus and attention onto things, because everyone's heads are going in every different direction. So sometimes we use agenda items to be able to get the attention back on. And sure, the city manager and others would say that we already were on there, the attention was already there, but we all know people's attention spans are short.
Yeah.
So the point of this item, I believe, for Councilmember Segura, was just to make sure that the attention is there and to get the city manager and everybody else is shifting back to that. Because even though it's been decades and yes, there are plans, like the whole point of the agenda item was just to bring that attention back.
And I think it succeeded.
And it did succeed.
Here we are
It did
talking about
succeed,
it.
because now at least we know what's happening and that there is a plan in place.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate y'all coming on Beyond the Headlines. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, that one thing we can't stop thinking about. Stay with us. Welcome back, everybody. We are here back again with the one thing we can't stop thinking about, and I think this is a collaborative one thing today. The 270th birthday of Laredo. It happened on May the 15th. Happy birthday to Laredo. Hey, a little bit of trivia. We are under 7 flags. We are also 26 years 26 years older than the United States. We are from 1755, and the United States is
1776.
So 21.
11 years.
So 21 years, right?
21,
Yeah, there we
21
go.
years,
There we go.
okay.
21 years.
Math, not my strong suit. But we are under 7 flags, nobody else is. So who can name the 7 flags?
Republic of the Rio Grande,
Okay,
State of Texas,
USA,
yeah,
Spain.
Spain,
yeah.
Mexico.
Mexico,
Confederacy.
Confederacy,
Confederacy?
Who do we miss?
The United
France.
States?
No, we said
France.
that. France.
and
France.
France. Okie doke.
There you go.
Okie doke. Well, we appreciate you sticking around with us. Happy birthday to Laredo, Councilwoman Melissa Cigarroa, Councilman Dr. Tyler King. Thank you for shedding some light on these very important issues. We look forward to continuing the conversation.
Absolutely.
That does it for this Sunday's issue or episode of Beyond the Headlines. Make sure to tune in next Sunday for another episode. Have a fantastic week ahead.